Here are 3 things that I prioritize every day to actually consistently burn fat. Now, more than 80% of people who lose weight regain it within a few years. But we also know that even minimal weight loss of between 5 and 13% can have a positive impact on health outcomes, notably blood sugar levels, so your risk of type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol. So these are things that I personally do every single day that are evidence-based ways to maintain a healthy weight long term. The first thing is adding protein, and specifically whole plant-based protein. Now, when we talk protein, most people often think of younger people or athletes trying to put on muscle mass. And whilst that is important, we also need to recognize that protein is perhaps the most important critical molecule in your body. It is responsible for, yes, muscle health, but the protein that you consume is largely used for things outside of muscle. It's actually things like your enzymes, hormones, cartilage. There's so many other uses of protein. In fact, you churn through around 300 grams of protein every single day. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to eat that much every single day, but your body is recycling and repurposing proteins all the time. That's primarily your liver's job. And older adults, particularly those who are above the age of 50 to 55, benefit from adding more protein to their meals to prevent bone loss and lower the risk of menopausal weight gain and belly fat as well. There have been several long-term clinical studies of 6 to 12 months that show that compared to other diets, participants that are given a higher protein diet, doesn't need to be massively high in protein, but a higher protein diet, lose body weight and fat mass. They show less weight regain, which is super important after that weight loss, and they improve their body composition by decreasing fat mass while preserving fat-free mass, otherwise muscle mass. Why might that be the case? Well, protein keeps you really satiated. By increasing protein, you increase hormones that reduce appetite. These are things like GLP-1, which is in the news obviously quite a lot because if we go over it in a whole bunch of other GLP-1 agonists, it also increases things like CCK, PYY. These are all hormones that are responsible for governing your appetite. And also protein decreases ghrelin, which eventually all sort of coalesces to reduce your food intake or reduces the drive and that motivation that causes you to eat food. The other thing about protein is that when you consume protein, you're actually using more energy to digest the protein itself. And this is because protein requires slightly more energy than carbohydrates and fat to be broken down. This is something called the high thermic effect. So you actually require 20 to 30% of the calories from the protein itself to be used for digestion and metabolism of the proteins compared to 5 to 10% for carbohydrates and 0 to 3% for fat. So fat tends to be a lot more absorbable than the carbohydrates and the proteins as well. Now, this extra effort required just to break down these proteins from these big macromolecules into the smaller amino acids during digestion can marginally increase your total energy burn each day. And even though that impact might be marginal, over time, each day, that can aid weight loss as well, which might explain some of the observations that we've seen in long-term studies on people with high protein diets and their ability to maintain weight maintenance. Now, I said I was going to talk to you a bit about how much. So there is debate about the amount of protein that people should be consuming. Right now, the recommended daily allowance for protein across both the UK and US is generally around 0.8 grams per kilogram of protein per day. So that's 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day, or something like 30% of calories coming from high protein sources. So this is quite a controversial area, but this was initially generated as the figure to maintain sufficiency. This doesn't necessarily look to optimal protein consumption to ensure healthy aging, to ensure bone mass density, to ensure healthy hormonal health. When you are particularly of an older age group, your protein requirements actually increase because your ability to absorb protein from your diet actually decreases as well. Also, added to this mix is if you are exercising regularly, your protein requirements may be higher too. So what is determined in the literature and amongst a lot of academics today are as a good amount of protein using the latest science is anywhere between 1.2 and 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight every single day. So this, if we're using an example of my weight, for example, 75 kilograms of body weight, this would be about 112.5 grams of protein every single day. So spread across each meal, that's around 37 grams of protein at each meal. So that's equivalent to 200 grams of tempeh, 150 grams of chicken breast, 300 grams of edamame, or 150 grams of whitefish per meal. Now, I'm being a bit facetious with those gram weights because it is unlikely that I'm only going to get the protein from those sources. It's likely that I'm going to have a bit of brown rice, a bit of cooked spinach, a bit of beans, for example. These are all contributing to the total amount of protein that I require each mealtime. But it just gives you some amounts to aim for when you're looking at that 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Now, I said you don't necessarily need to rely on animal-based protein, particularly for weight loss and long-term health goals. When you're consuming plant-based proteins, they have the extra advantage of being bundled in with fiber and bioactive compounds that support your gut health, that help support a lower risk of heart disease and type 2 diabetes. That isn't to say that you need to completely remove all animal-based products or that they aren't good sources, because they're very convenient. They tend to be higher in protein than all other plant-based sources, but I wouldn't rely purely on animal-based proteins, because what you'll be missing out on are those gut healthy and inflammation supporting ingredients like edamame, like beans, and like tempeh and tofu, which are some of my favorite sources of plant-based proteins. Just a quick one. If you're enjoying this content, you will love my mini series on inflammation. I go through the different types of foods that you should be having, what inflammation actually is, plus lifestyle practices to reduce inflammation. You can get it for free right now in the link in the caption below. Back to the podcast. Now, a lot of people have questions about eating more protein. Is there an upper limit of too much protein? There are concerns that it could be harmful to your bones and kidneys. Current research argues that eating more protein is actually not shown to affect renal function in healthy people. That isn't recommended for people with active kidney disease or low GFR, that's low glomerular filtration rates. That is indicative of certain amount of kidney dysfunction, or for those people on dialysis essentially. And if you do have an existing condition, you might want to be careful about increasing your protein consumption. That's something that affects your liver, for example, your kidneys. But for those who are otherwise healthy, there does not appear to be a damaging impact, particularly at the level that I've just described of 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram. I've got a couple of tips for you if you want to start increasing your protein intake. Number one is to start your day with protein. So having protein at the start of your day can aid satiety. It can mean that you're not going to be hungry mid-morning and end up going for high refined carbohydrate snacks, for example. So think about adding yogurts or kefirs or eggs or beans at the start of your day. It will certainly help you keep within your caloric needs, particularly at the first half and the first couple of hours of your day as well. The second thing is to snack smart. Snacks are usually high in added sugars and carbohydrates. Instead, go for protein-packed snacks like nuts and seeds and yogurt, again, like I've said, or edamame, for example. These are great protein-rich and fiber-rich sources that, again, will help with your satiety levels. And the other thing I would say is to combine protein sources. So for a complete protein profile, particularly if you're only relying on plant-based sources of protein, which in my opinion isn't ideal, you want to definitely combine different sources like rice and beans or animal protein with plant-based sources. So for example, I tend to add lentils like pui lentils that you can find in these pre-packaged cooked varieties that have minimal added ingredients. Usually it's just a tiny bit of salt and cooked pui lentils. I might add that to a meat-based dish or like crab salad, for example, to add a little bit more of those protective nutrients and of course fiber as well. So think about combining different protein sources, particularly if you are plant-based as well. The second thing that is a pragmatic strategy that I use personally and I recommend to patients is to eat an earlier dinner. Now, when we eat is another overlooked factor in weight management. And research shows that intermittent fasting can lead to 3 to 8% weight loss over 3 to 24 weeks, with a significant portion of this being lost from fat. Now, I just want to recognize and put out there that intermittent fasting is a really vague term. Intermittent fasting can refer to 5-2 diets, alternate day fasting. It can even refer to even more extreme 3-day fast. These are all intermittent fasting methods. When we talk about intermittent fasting in this context, I'm actually really referring to time-restricted feeding. So that is where you don't change the caloric consumption within a 24-hour period. You're simply changing when you choose to eat said calories. Why is this effective? Well, eating within a shorter period of time and avoiding late night eating can help prevent overeating and snacking. So it's much harder to actually overeat in 8 hours than it is for 16. If I was allowed to eat between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m., there's so much more opportunity with less restrictions for me to consume lots of different things, ice creams, cookies, particularly when I'm bored. If you reduce that window, then I'm giving myself less opportunity to actually consume calories. So inadvertently, what you're actually doing is just simply consuming less calories. The other thing that it might help with, this is earlier dinners, is improving circadian rhythm. So a number of studies have described circadian influences in weight management, with greater weight loss reported when more calories were consumed earlier in the day rather than later in the day. Eating late can cause circadian disruption, which is linked to lower resting energy expenditure and glucose tolerance. So if you're eating late, what you might inadvertently be doing is disrupting the quality of your sleep. And there are other studies that show that if you do have disturbed sleep for whatever reason it might be, your glucose tolerance is less efficient during the day and you're more likely to snack and have a high amount of appetite, a higher amount of these hunger hormones as well. That can lead to over energy consumption too. So these are a couple of tips for how I close my eating window. So definitely eating an early dinner, that's one way, having a pragmatic strategy and ensuring that I'm not dawdling in the kitchen and I'm trying to eat a couple of hours before I go to bed. I delay my breakfast. So instead of waking up first thing in the morning and reaching for breakfast, no matter how hungry I feel, I sort of have a bit of a chill out period. I go to the garden, I walk around, I obviously do my morning hygiene. I'll take the dog for a walk. I'll actually exercise in a fasted state, which actually increases my fat oxidation potential as well. But I'll have my breakfast slightly later in the morning. And that again will just reduces the window that I'm actually giving myself to consume any food at all. The other thing I do is I snack smart. So instead of, if I do ever get those hunger pangs in the middle of the day, I'll always have some nuts or some seeds ready to hand just to consume. So I'm not going to be reaching for anything that's refined carbohydrate based that can put me on a bit of a sugar roller coaster and corresponding cravings later on in the day. The other thing that I think is really important to be pragmatic about is that I'm really flexible about this kind of stuff. So at the weekend, let's say, or if we've got like a dinner coming up and that's going to be late, I'm not going to be fasting during that dinner. I'm going to give myself the metabolic flexibility to enjoy dinner and just be a lot more relaxed about it. But as a general guide, these are the kind of things that I do to try and close that window as often as possible. The third strategy to maintain fat loss every day is to increase fiber. Ideally, you want to be going for 30 grams per day. I think that's the bare minimum. So current evidence shows that eating more fiber and aiming for a minimum of 30 grams each day promotes weight loss. There was a study published in Nature where calorie intake was controlled across 2 different diets, but the dietary fiber was increased in one of those diets that was labeled as the microbiome supporting diet, because fiber, as we know, supports our microbes. And the other one was essentially a westernized diet. This was one that was lower in fiber. The participants actually absorbed fewer calories in the microbiome supporting diet. Specifically, they absorbed only around 89.5% of the ingested calories in that microbiota diet, compared to 95% on a Western diet. Now, that might not sound like that much. 5% difference here or there, doesn't really matter. Over time, you can imagine that 5% difference compounding again and again and again each day. And it only takes a little bit more in terms of your calorie consumption, but also the way those calories are actually packaged to be more absorbable than the calories that you'd find in a high fiber diet to have this detrimental impact on your weight gain, steadily increasing again and again and again. And multiple studies also show statistically significant reductions in risks of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease with higher dietary fiber intakes. Basically, this is a no-brainer to have more fiber in your diet. Now, what's going on? Well, we talked a bit about dietary fiber before. Dietary fiber is a complex mixture of non-digestible molecules, mostly polysaccharides. And fiber isn't just one thing. There are multiple different subtypes of fiber. And they work in a number of different ways. They actually help you feel fuller for longer. They slow down your eating rate. If you're eating a high fiber food, you're not going to be chomping down. It's not going to be as easy to digest this food. You will actually reduce your eating rate as well. It will support digestive health and that diverse gut microbiota that can reduce inflammation and also signal appropriately to your brain the correct satiety signals. It will improve your cholesterol metabolism. It can improve glucose levels by slowing down the absorption of the sugars that you find naturally in food and ones that are broken down from complex carbohydrates into simpler carbohydrates. It can also improve your insulin sensitivity as well. So there are a number of different ways in which fiber actually improves weight maintenance. It is a fantastic ingredient and one that we should be celebrating a lot more of, particularly as most people do not hit that minimum threshold of 30 grams of fiber every single day. Now, there are a couple of ways in which to increase your daily fiber intake. There are a couple of things that I do every single day. Number one, every time I sit down to eat a meal, I'm always asking myself, can I add just one more? Can I add just one more fruit, vegetable, nut, or seed? Just one more. Can I add some butternut squash to the side of the salad? Can I add some lentils to the stew that I'm eating? If I'm enjoying a lovely piece of fish, what kind of greens can I have with that? I'm always thinking about just one more, just one more. Can I add just one more? In fact, I've done a whole TED talk basically talking about how you can add just one more of these fruit, vegetables, nuts, or seeds, because these all contain different types of fiber. And the other thing I always ask myself at the start of the day or the end of the day, did I get my BBGs? My BBGs are beans, berries, greens, seeds, and nuts. So beans, for obvious reasons, very high in fiber. Greens also contain some fibers, not much, but different types of fibers that you'd find in other sorts of ingredients. Berries, great source of different types of fibers, but also there's polyphenols. And nuts and seeds are surprisingly high in protein, but they also have lots of fibers in as well. And one extra bonus one is that I'm always thinking about whole grain. So if I have the opportunity to have a rice-based dish, I'm going to go for the short grain brown rice rather than the white jasmine rice. Or if I'm going to have a noodle-based dish, I'm going to go for the soba noodles instead of the white rice noodles per se. There's lots of different ways in which you can just increase your fiber intake bit by bit. These are the main ways in which I would be thinking to boost my daily fiber intake for those gut microbiota benefits, but also those weight maintenance benefits as well. And obviously, calorie control is super important. You have to be thinking about limiting your calories using whatever dietary strategy you choose that fits your food preference and fits your lifestyle. If you're interested in how to lose fat, lose belly fat, and improve weight maintenance, you'll love this episode here where I talk about not only the diets, but also the supplements and the other factors that govern weight loss. Check it out right there.